Someone on the Rams finally responded to what Dan Campbell said after his game versus the Minnesota Vikings. We're going to talk about who said what, and we're also going to discuss what the Minnesota Vikings may be afraid of in terms of their matchup versus the Los Angeles Rams. And we're also going to discuss what Sean McVay had to say about the Vikings. All in today's episode of the Rams Digest. I'm your host, Josh Rehinon. If you guys are not subscribed to the channel, do me a favor and press that subscribe button, as 86% of you guys are watching the videos but still not subscribed to the channel. We'd appreciate you if you subscribe so you don't miss any daily Rams content here at the Rams Digest. But we have a lot to get into, so let's start off with this story here, as response to Dan Campbell's disrespect has officially been made. And it wasn't some kind of big press conference or anything like that. And I'm sure multiple players, or maybe at this point Sean McVay, has spoken a little bit about it. But for the most part, this is all I've seen myself. And we'll pull this up here as safety Quentin, or defensive back Quentin Lake, responds to Dan Campbell's "see you in 2 weeks" jab. And for those who maybe missed it, maybe didn't see what was said from Dan Campbell, essentially after the game, we talked about this a couple episodes ago, but essentially after the game between the Minnesota Vikings and the Detroit Lions, Dan Campbell went up to head coach Kevin O'Connell of the Vikings and said, "Hey, we'll see you in 2 weeks," kind of shook his hand there. And it was a little bit of a, like I said, from my perspective, it was a little bit of a, just acknowledging, hey, look, these are two good teams, top two teams in the NFC. They are expecting to battle each other again in the playoffs, and it was kind of showing Kevin O'Connell his respect, saying that Dan Campbell, just because they took care of business at the end of the season, doesn't mean he's going to lose respect for the Vikings. He's expecting to meet them again in the playoffs, as this seems to be the top two teams in the NFC, the teams that are going to kind of battle it out the most for the NFC spot in the Super Bowl. Of course, you have the Philadelphia Eagles and teams like that are trying to, of course, do what they have to do, including the Rams, to try to get themselves in that position. But everyone seems to kind of pick the Minnesota Vikings and the Detroit Lions as those kind of top two teams. So let's focus on what Quentin Lake had to say, as he responded by saying, here's a little quick quote, and there's a little bit of a typo from Mike Garofalo's tweet here, but just want to acknowledge kind of what Quentin Lake said briefly. He said, "They might see each other, they might not, but you have to see us. We'll keep tabs on that, and hopefully somebody doesn't eat their words." Now, it's interesting, obviously, coming from the Rams' perspective, right? You kind of want them to eat their words, right? But I kind of get what Quentin Lake was saying, and he did. I want to acknowledge, this isn't the full quote from him. He was saying that, look, I don't think, Dan Campbell meant anything bad when he said what he had to say, but whatever, who cares? The reality is, it is kind of a slight jab, and we talked about this too right here on Rams Digest. It is a slight jab. Unintentional jab, but it's a jab nonetheless. And I think Dan Campbell didn't really mean to disrespect the Rams, but at the end of the day, the Rams can take it as they will if they want to take it as disrespect. Clearly, Quentin Lake and other people in the locker room have heard what Dan Campbell said, so it's maybe a positive. Maybe they use it as motivation to kind of win the game. But I think Quentin Lake was kind of saying, look, it is what it is. We're going to try to take care of business and try to make them eat their words, but we'll kind of have to go from there and see if that is the case. So just an interesting kind of perspective. It was nice to see someone in the building and the Rams organization heard the quote, right? Some Rams fans on Twitter kind of talking about, I hope everyone sees this video and sees this clip. Quentin Lake, someone who was a big piece of this defense, clearly saw it, clearly had something to say about it. So although he is taking it lightly, it's something that has been acknowledged by the Rams locker room. And so very, very intriguing stuff there. We'll see. Maybe if the Rams and Detroit Lions find a way to face off, it'll be a topic of conversation, I'm sure, of someone will ask Dan Campbell what he felt about that quote now, if he was playing the Rams right in a couple weeks, or if he's playing the Minnesota Vikings, it may come up in conversation as well. So interesting stuff nonetheless. Very, very small, quick little story. I think Quentin Lake laughed it off, and I think that's kind of where we should be with it as well. But it will be a funny story to bring up if the Rams do find a way to win on Monday night. Moving on from that, who are the Vikings most concerned about? Are they worried about someone in the Rams, right? Of course, we've talked about all the pieces the Rams have on their offensive side of the ball. Defense has been playing well as well. Young defensive team that's rejuvenated. They're playing well. They're excited. They're young, ready to go. Offensive side of things, they got some experience. Side of things, they got some experience. They got some veteran, qualities to them in terms of that duo with Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp. The head coaching with Sean McVay, all together, including Puka Nacua, Kyren Williams, has been a really good offense, right? And generally speaking, last few weeks has been a little bit rough toward the end of the season, but generally speaking, they're a good offense. They have talent on offense, and I think that's important to kind of note. And so who would the Vikings, from their perspective, who would they be worried about? Who are they concerned about? Well, we do have a little bit of insight coming from their defensive coordinator, the Vikings defense coordinator, that is Brian Flores, who says that Rams are a different team with Puka Nacua. So he was a little bit surprised to see, Puka Nacua was dealing with an injury last time before the matchup versus the Vikings. A little bit of surprise, he just kind of got announced announced off of IR, and then all of a sudden, right, he was kind of ready to go. If you guys remember back when that happened, it seemed like usually when players are taken off IR after 4 weeks, it's like, okay, they have the IR stamp. Maybe they get a couple weeks in practice, maybe a week and a half or so before they get a game in. But no, he kind of just was taken off IR and essentially, boom, ready to go, full swing of things, and had a good game versus the Minnesota Vikings, right? And so here's what Brian Flores had to say about that kind of surprise, if you will, of start from Puka Nacua. Brian Flores said the Vikings found out about 4 hours before the first Rams game that Puka Nacua was going to play, adding that they were a little bit surprised that he was out there, and saying there was a little bit of scrambling to prepare for the fact that he'd play. The Rams, Flores said, are very different with Puka Nacua. The Vikings obviously have a plan for him this time. And so, obviously we've talked about this. The Rams are a different team, and we've already known this before Brian Flores kind of is saying it already, but Brian Flores, a well-respected coach, a defensive mind in the NFL, is essentially coming out and saying that was not fun to kind of find out last minute that Puka Nacua was going to be ready to play, because it's a completely different game plan. You throw out everything else you were thinking about how you're going to defend the Rams, because you got to now focus on how to defend Puka Nacua. And from what I remember, he had a decent game, right, versus the Minnesota Vikings last time he played. And so I think it's interesting to hear. It's nice to hear another team from, obviously we have our respect for Puka Nacua, and I think everyone should have a lot of respect for what Puka Nacua does in the football field. But it's nice to hear from the defensive coordinator of the other team saying that they were a little surprised, and there was a little bit of scrambling to go around last matchup. But now they're going to be very well prepared to, slow down Puka Nacua at least as much as they can. And so maybe that opens the door for guys like, Cooper Kupp to kind of have a game, and Kyren Williams to hopefully have a game. And hopefully Matthew Stafford is prepared, and Sean McVay as well, with this offense, prepared to look elsewhere in case that Brian Flores and this defense is really ready to focus in on Puka Nacua and slowing him down. So just like I said, a little bit of an intriguing perspective to hear from the defensive coordinator of the Vikings, and hear what they're kind of concerned about, and how much respect they have for a guy like Puka Nacua. Moving on to the last bit of stuff to talk about here, as Sean McVay had to also talk about the Vikings, right? We get the perspective from the Vikings defensive coordinator. Now we're going to get the perspective from the Rams head coach and what he had to say about the Vikings. Now, I did kind of chop up his quote because it was a bit of a long one, but this is kind of what we've been talking about, okay? I wanted to acknowledge again, I don't want to say we're scared or worried too much about the Vikings, but essentially I wanted to acknowledge that there is a lot of positive, if you're a Vikings fan, from a Vikings fan perspective, in terms of what they have on offense, right? A lot of things to fear from the Rams perspective facing this Minnesota Vikings defense, and this is what Sean McVay had to say about it, right? Obviously, Sam Darnold has had a great year. It's cool to see Cam Akers do his thing. Aaron Jones is dangerous. Justin Jefferson is unique as it gets. Jordan Addison is an excellent football player. You've seen Naylor make a bunch of plays, and getting Hawkinson back has been big for them. It's going to be a great challenge, but it's an NFL playoff football, so we're excited about it, and we're diving into that preparation as we speak. And the reason why I'm kind of pulling that up here, and I'm sorry, I'm missing on this quote here. The reason why I'm pulling up this quote is because I did want to kind of show, like, from the Minnesota Vikings perspective, right? They're worried about Puka Nacua, and of course, I'm sure they have a lot of respect for Stafford and Kyren Williams and Tyler Higbee and, Cooper Kupp, but when you look at the flip side of things, what the Rams have to worry about defensively, it's Justin Jefferson, it's Jordan Addison, it's Naylor, who's been playing well for them, it's T.J. Hawkinson, it's Aaron Jones with a little bit of Cam Akers, who we know very well, right, from the Rams perspective. A lot of pieces on that offense. Sam Darnold has been playing really well all year long, generally speaking. It's going to be a lot to handle from the Rams' perspective. You can see Sean McVay is acknowledging that there's, we talk about what the Rams have on offense. This Vikings offense has a lot of pieces that they've been, of course, obviously, putting well together. So, it's going to be a battle. It's going to be a battle. It's going to be a tough game, a tough matchup for the Rams. And I don't want to keep repeating myself. I sound like a broken record here, but I just want to, again, kind of, bring up, this is what Sean McVay is kind of saying about this team. And you got to really, really pay attention to all these names. And, you can try to slow down Justin Jefferson, but they still got some pieces on that offense. And the biggest thing I think is going to be slowing down that run game first. Slowing down Justin Jefferson is going to be a hope, but kind of a not really expectation, I would say. Maybe if you can kind of, slow down the TJ Hawkinsons, the Addisons, the Nailers, the run game, and just kind of let Jefferson do his thing. Maybe the perspective of the Rams take, we'll see how kind of, or the approach the Rams take, we'll kind of see if that's the route they take moving forward. And so, you guys let me know what you guys are feeling about all this. Obviously, again, we still have some more to get into with this Rams and Vikings matchup. Next episode, I'm planning on pulling up some detailed numbers of what the offense is looking like, what the defense is looking like for both sides, and kind of breaking that down. But you guys let me know how you guys are feeling about this matchup. Still a few days away from the game. That's going to do it for me on today's episode of the Rams Digest. I'm your host, Josh Giron, and I am out.